they'd be upset. System in Ventura County, California. And I would love nothing more than to read you some snippets. But we got to get to Roger Tanner. But before we go to Roger Tanner, I just need to remind you one more time of this little book, which every school should require as reading before they graduate from high school, called LBJ, The Mastermind of the JFK Assassination. And those brooding eyes, if you're under 60, you wouldn't know who that is. But those brooding eyes are the psychopath eyes of President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Truly one of our worst presidents ever, because he was in on the assassination. He was a key player in the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who, despite continuing to escalate the war on the advice of his ignoramus generals and admirals in Vietnam, which I was a participant in that fiasco, Kennedy didn't want to do the war in Vietnam. It was actually Republican Eisenhower who started it. Kennedy continued it on bad advice, but he had a plan to get reelected after getting rid of this psychopath and then get a more pro-peace vice presidential candidate. And as soon as they won re-election in '64, the plan was, we'll pull out and stop getting Americans killed. If Kennedy had not been assassinated and we had pulled out in late '64 or early '65, I never would have suffered in Vietnam. And probably 50 of the 56,000 Americans that died there would not have died there, including my best friend and 5 cousins. I highly recommend this book because it is well documented. This is not a book like LaToya Jackson's, with almost no citations of who said what about what. This guy documents everything, and the fact that there was absolutely no autopsy of the president's sister, LBJ's sister, Josepha, who was murdered on Christmas Eve. She didn't die peacefully in a hospital or under a doctor's care. She was murdered, and her brother was the prime culprit. He documents this. Now in Texas, when somebody dies outside the hospital, just like California and most states, the law requires a coroner's report and an autopsy to see if there's any foul play. There was no autopsy of the vice president's sister. They just snuffed her. Why? You should read the book. I can tell you, but you should read the book. It's worth, you get it from Skyhorse, skyhorsepublishing.com. The price has come down a little bit from its original price of about $17. I don't get any kickbacks. I'm just telling you, if you want to know how J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the CIA, head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, Clinton Murchison, and the vice president conspired to kill their own president and then blame it on Fidel Castro, read the book. With that done, I think we are ready. Now he's talking about the attempt to murder Judge Spears way back in the Midwest somewhere. We ready? I give you Roger Tanner.
No one contested it.
Okay.
Okay? In the same way on this one. Now, I had witnesses with me when I took this in. And again, no contested. They handed it back to me. Well, you can see in the paperwork that I've given you that they have, if they touch it, it's the same as being filed.
All right. I saw that citation in the law. So what does this do with you being a businessman and the FBI refusing to do something they should do?
You have to ask them. They're the ones breaking law, not me.
So you had said somebody was supposed to assassinate you, right? And how did you find out someone was supposed to assassinate you?
The first information was given, I'm trying to think what year. I'm going to say 88, 89, when an individual came forth that was dying of cancer. And he did an interview with Jim Harpin, Channel 13 News, WTOL in Toledo, Ohio. I guess the interview, I wasn't there. I didn't know anything about it until afterwards, but there was probably almost 2 hours of testimony of how he was hired by a local individual in Findlay, Ohio, given $6,500 as half payment to execute me. He didn't get the job done, but he was dying. He got religion, and a guy by the name of Bob Geyer was his mentor or whatever, and the guy's name was Jim Sherrard. He, shortly after that, died. That was the first.
Jim Sherrard died?
Sherrard, yes.
Sherrard. And he was supposed to do the hit.
Yes. Yeah. He was.
And he told this local channel.
Yeah. He went on board. He went on camera and told the whole thing.
And you have the
Now,
video of that?
No, that was turned over to the FBI. Also, according to Jim Harpin, who's still in the Toledo area, his manager at the television station was a guy by the name of Al Manis, was the manager of the radio or television station. So one of those two individuals has also a copy. The FBI has a copy of that. Nothing was ever done. So much for that. That was one. Also, shortly, I think it might have been, it was in that same area. You're going to have to get the information from Charlie Hansen, who's not able to make it here today. Charlie Hansen owned a company in Toledo called Post Office Alternative, him and his brother. It was recognized in the Entrepreneurs magazine as one of the top ideas of that year. They had an office on Reynolds Road and then one down in Seagate in Toledo. And two individuals come into the office on Reynolds Road one day when he wasn't there and threatened his wife. And the following day he was there because he didn't know what it was all about. They were upset with a operative of a company called Bounty Hunter Magazine. And they were looking for that operative. And the next day he was there, Charlie was, and he looked across the road and somebody pulled in and they laid a high-powered rifle across the top of the car and they shot at him, just missed him, went through the front plate glass and then through 3 walls in the back. Described as we were able to decipher later, it was most likely Walter Trowbridge and his undersheriff from Monroe County, Michigan. The reason Trowbridge was upset with Bounty Hunter Magazine, the operative they were trying to get with Bounty Hunter Magazine had exposed to Channel News in Detroit, Bill Proctor, and to the Detroit Free Press, and I can't remember the guy's name that wrote the stories at the Free Press, and also the Toledo Blade wrote, I think in an assumption or whatever, there's probably 10 articles in each newspaper, which the writer from the Detroit Free Press won the Pulitzer as a result, explaining the corruption that was going on in Monroe, Michigan, and how inmates were being killed and brutally beaten. The individual they were looking for to silence him, because he would work with John Conyers, Congressman John Conyers, and an attorney by the name of Rodney Watts, who was the attorney who'd sued, representing the victims in that county. And so this was retaliation to try and silence the operative. A short time afterward, this incident with Charlie Hansen, his other building downtown Seagate, they stated, I think the FBI stated, that it appeared that somebody stuck about 400 pounds of C4 in the building and they leveled it.
What year was that?
Be 88, I believe. 87, 88, in that era.
So you used to investigate these things as a private citizen?
I work for Bounty Hunter magazine
Oh, you worked for Bounty Hunter magazine.
under a different name.
What name did you use when you worked for Bounty Hunter?
I don't know, because there's still some prosecutors that want that guy.
Well, that was Roger Tanner from Ohio. As you can see, he stopped where we asked for his pseudonym for Bounty Hunter magazine. A former police officer whose father, he says, was also sheriff, is also here to validate part of Roger's story. Brad Bell, when did your law enforcement career start? And then quickly tell me how you became involved in this.
My law enforcement career started in 1971, and I spent 30 years at the Sheriff's Department as a deputy sheriff most of that time. This particular incident happened in late 2000. I was working a midnight shift. I was a senior officer on duty, and I got a call to meet with the FBI at a trailer park on the east side of Findlay at about 4 in the morning, which was a little unusual. But I arrived and located the special agent in charge, and he was parked up by the pool house, and I said, "What's going on? What do you want?" And he informed me that they had a warrant for a highly dangerous individual, and they had deployed a FBI SWAT team around this individual's house, and they were watching it currently. And what they wanted me for was to initiate a stop when the individual left his house, and they presumed that would be about 6 o'clock in the morning. We discussed the tactics, and he wanted me to just pull my cruiser out as the individual came down the road parallel and blocking so that they could initiate a takedown. And as we're sitting in my car, my cruiser, and he's telling me this, and I'm saying, here's the problem I have with this. You know, he told me who he was. It was Roger. And I said, do you want me just to go down and get Roger?
It was this Roger? This
Yeah,
Roger
Roger
Tanner?
Tanner. Yeah, he said, we have a warrant for Roger Tanner. And I said, do you want me just to go get him? Because I can do that right now, you know. He won't be a problem. He said, oh, no, he's dangerous. He's dangerous. He said he was really dangerous. And I said, well, here's the problem I have with your plan is that it's pretty obvious to me that you're going to kill him. And if I'm sitting in front of this and all this comes from behind, they're firing right at me. So I have a real problem with your plan. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll do anything you ask me to do. I said, are you going to be in my car? And he goes, yes. And I said, well, then how are you going to get out? And he kind of looked at me, and I said, I'm bailing. As soon as I pull out, I'll have my overhead lights on and pull in front of him, and hopefully he'll stop so you have enough room to get out. But I'm opening the driver's door, and I'm getting out of the way so that if they do open up on him, I'm not in the line of fire. And I said that in a half jest, but I was also concerned about what was going on.
And how many FBI agents heard you say that?
Well,
Agent-in-chief was who?
he had a tactical arrest SWAT team, so I'm going to say there probably was 7 or 8.
And who was the one in charge? Do you remember his name?
I don't remember his name, no. You know, I have no recollection of his name.
And you were driving a county
A marked sheriff's cruiser, yes.
marked sheriff cruiser.
Right, and that's what they wanted. They wanted a marked unit.
So it looked like just a traffic stop.
Well, so that there was somebody of local jurisdiction.
Right, that gave him jurisdiction.
Right,
You're the hook.
And the question in the back of my mind is, we're in the city of Findlay limits, and why didn't they get a hold of the city police department? You know, it was kind of unusual, I thought, at the time, but I didn't think a whole lot about it. But
At 4 a.m. and you didn't think a lot about
well,
it?
I didn't think a lot of, I didn't think a lot about why they didn't call the police department. They didn't want the police department to have anything to do with this.
Why not?
I have no idea.
Did they clear this with your sheriff?
Yes, I think it was through a lieutenant, because I got an initial call from a lieutenant.
Oh, you got a call from the lieutenant in
lieutenant,
charge that
right.
night.
Well, no, he was home. They called him at home.
And
He wasn't working.
and
I
he-
was a senior officer on duty.
And he validated to you that you should cooperate.
Yes. Yeah,
And
we
then
cooperate.
Who was the sheriff at the time?
That would have been Mike Heldman.
Sheriff Mike Hellman?
Yeah. He's still the sheriff now.
He's still the sheriff.
Certainly.
This was what year?
Fall of 2000, late 2000.
Okay, so we're talking pretty recently, like in the last 15 years. Why would they want Roger dead now?
Well, you know, I just didn't like what appeared to be going on. So as we're sitting there, about an hour or two later, the agents deployed, start radio traffic. There's movement. He's coming out, and all of a sudden I hear abort. He's got a child with him. Abort. So they stood down. So their whole plan was basically no
Canceled.
longer a plan.
Canceled.
Because there was a child present in close proximity to Roger. And as I recall, the Roger came out, and I still initiated the stop. I just blocked, and he was just got out of the car in a less aggressive manner, I think.
Who was the child, Roger?
My son.
Your son. How old was your son?
Let's see, he's 20 now, so he would have been
About 5?
4 or 5. Yeah.
4 or 5.
Just a beautiful little guy.
And Roger still had no idea what this was about when he got out.
Right.
So then what
Well,
happened?
they took over. I mean, it was their.
Did take
It was
over.
their arrest. Yes. All I did was provide the visual for him to stop, and he did. And there was no, you know, he complied, and
There was no
he was
confrontation.
taken without resistance. Yeah.
And did they handcuff him?
Well, I'm sure they did.
Or did you handcuff him?
No, it was all of them.
Handcuff, shackle, body shackle, everything.
Did that appear to be necessary to you?
Well, I know Roger.
And at that time, you'd known him for 20
I
years?
known him long enough that I could have went up and knocked on the door and brought him out, but that was refused, so.
So what did your son think at that time, Roger?
He was crying. He didn't know why they were, what's going on, Daddy, what's going on?
Did he ever get over the shock? Did he ever come to understand it?
No, he's still to this day don't understand why.
Do you understand why, Mr. Bell?
Well, I understand they were very concerned that they perceived Roger as a extreme danger.
Because he had some connection to Bounty Hunter magazine? Or
I have no idea or no knowledge of that.
they never told you any reason why he was dangerous?
Just his past history and having weapons and stuff.
Is it against the Constitution to own weapons?
No, not legally, no.
I mean, I thought there was still a Second Amendment in place in the year
Certainly there is,
2000.
but I'm just telling you that they perceived him as an extremely dangerous individual based on the fact they bring a SWAT team down and do this at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning seems, that does seem to me, as a journalist, to be a little bit beyond normal FBI hours. Just a little beyond normal FBI hours. Roger, what came of that? Is that what this lawsuit you're talking
Yes,
about?
Yes.
So now the lawsuit starts.
Well, no, the lawsuit had started before this, and it is my belief that this was carried out due to the fact that my lawsuit in '94, I detected that there was a treason committed by David Katz, and I had made it aware, including this information that I had handed out to you, that people were aware of it, and they wanted to silence. They wanted to silence me. The fact of the matter is, if you study the law, once there's been a violation, a judge has great latitude, and the judge can change his plight by admitting mistake and change it unless you let it set for 7 years. I let this set for 7 years. It's called the latch. That means at that point you can't change it. It's on the record. At that point I started to release, and that would have been in 98, it'd be 99. I started to expose the fact that what he done was a felony, and I feel that this FBI action against me was to silence me from going forth with the exposure that the judge had committed treason. And they charged me, and I can read it to you, it's right here. They charged me with 2 counts. On or about December 26, 2000, in the Northern District of Ohio, Western Division, the defendant, Roger Tanner, did threaten to assault or murder Richard Spears, a United States bankruptcy judge, with the intent to retaliate against Richard Spears on account of the performance of his official duty in violation of Title 18 U.S. United States Code section, so on and so forth. The only thing that come out in the trial was that they had no witnesses except Sam Morrison, who was an attorney that represented me, who I had caught lying to the court and also lying to the local sheriff that property that he and another attorney were involved with had been stolen. It hadn't been stolen. They were selling the property and pocketing the money. Well, he had to do anything to save himself. So he lied to the grand jury, had his secretary lie to the grand jury, and in open trial, he ran on and ran and raved how I did this and on and on. When they asked his secretary, ma'am, did Roger Tanner ever threaten Judge Spears? She says, no. Did Roger Tanner ever threaten anybody in Judge Spears' staff that she knew of? She says, no. Did Roger Tanner ever call Judge Spears, his family, staff, or anything? She said, no. And the question next was, well then, how did you come to the conclusion that Roger Tanner threatened Judge Spears? She says, I assumed. Now, the interesting thing before the trial, an hour before, a federal marshal by the name of Rodney Hartzell was laughing. I know Rodney. We've worked together in the past. But he was laughing. He took me out of the cage and he fingerprinted me and he said, you're not going to believe what's going on. I says, what? He says, well, you're not going to go to prison for 25 years. He says, they got a big problem. I says, what is it? He says, I can't tell you. And I says, come on, Rodney, tell me. And he's laughing. He says, well, he says, I'll put it this way. There's 2 inmates back there in the stainless steel cage. They're going to come out here and they're going to testify that they assisted you in the attempt to kill Judge Spears. He said Judge Spears' house was vandalized, his car was destroyed, and they're going to say that they assisted you in that. The only problem was they just found out that when this incident happened, you were in Blanchard Valley Hospital in intensive care with acute pneumonia. Bingo.
So you were literally saved by having pneumonia.
Yes.
If you'd not been in intensive care for pneumonia,
Yes.
they would have railroaded you into prison for
Yes.
25 years for something you didn't even think of doing.
Yes.
What, Mr. Bell, you were a police officer. What does that make you think of the system?
I have a different perspective now than I had when I was involved because you're not aware of things that go on or you don't question, especially federal authorities. You just don't question what they do. You presume they're on the up and up.
Is that a false presumption now, in your opinion?
Well, I've had dealings with another federal agency in another case, and I've come to conclude that certain individuals, not all, but certain individuals in this federal law enforcement agency tainted their investigation and basically framed a guy, so yeah.
So, Roger, what is your solution to get justice for what they did to you in front of your 5-year-old son?
I've filed suit, and there's been more and more numerous violations of law. And once you start, it's like a domino effect. Once you start going after them, and you cannot lie, you cannot perjure yourself, you cannot make false accusations. You have to. There's 3 types of information. There's the black and white, which is no doubt it's true. There's the gray, which is questionable, and then there's the black, which is totally can't prove it. Well, I tried to go and get as much as I could. I'd like to have more sometimes, but I'm not going to push the envelope unless I can get the exact facts. And as Brad knows, there's been cases in the past that I've given information to not only him, but other members of the Sheriff's Department. I didn't know the answer, but I would give them what I had, and then they went ahead and made the proper movements. I've been undercover, I've been wired, I've been sent on stuff that they couldn't find anybody that would do it, especially in Michigan when I was working with Rodney Watts and John Conyers. They couldn't find anybody that would go inside of Monroe County because they said they'll kill you. Well, they didn't get the job done. Still here. So Rodney Watts was able to get over $7 million in settlement for victims. That's the kind of stuff we need. We need people to be assertive, not crazy, not stupid, not going to whip the world. Just get the information and get it to a coordinator where that coordinator then can put it together. Our prosecutors have to be more in tune and not assume as much as they have. They are good people out there at all walks of life, and we have to deal with that. Everything that I've done to help the community, I've never asked for 1 cent. The largest EPA violation bust in Hancock County's history, which was over $100 million of the city of Findlay, I worked with U.S. Attorney Nash. His last name is Nash. Anyways, he's in Chicago with the EPA, and they got the city had to force them to build a new sewer plant, and that information was all turned over and with no return for me. Someplace I got his phone number still. He tells me to call him, come see me in Chicago, but I never have. There's been many cases that I've done, try to help out, clean up, and sometimes I'm wrong. I can't say I'm right all the time. I'm not a miracle worker, but if I've got something that will assist them to clean up the group that we live in, to help children out, I found out that there's violation in the children's home many years ago, and as a result, we cut a deal with one of the local attorneys that represented the Child Protective Service that they would close the children's home rather than being exposed what a doctor and I had uncovered in that children's home. You don't always get a big win, but to protect the children, and we got them all back in their homes for Christmas that year. These are the wins. They might be shallow to some people, but they mean a lot to me.
Mr. Bell, how long have you been retired from the police department?
14 years now.
Has your attitude towards national news of federal agents doing great things and doing great drug busts, has your perception of what the media puts out there changed?
Well, I think I'm very skeptical of the media. Very skeptical of they all seem to have an agenda. And when one has an agenda, then they tend to taint and how they report.
And how they report it.
Yeah. So I take everything pretty much with a grain of salt.
Do you think the sheriff, what was his name? The still sheriff there?
Heldman?
What's his name?
Heldman.
Heldman.
Yeah.
Do you think his attitude has changed at all towards cooperating with federal authorities since this?
Well, I think it's a natural given that any law enforcement officer is going to cooperate with another law enforcement agency. I mean, you just do that. You don't always, it's not up to you to decide how they do things. When an agency above you comes in and says, this is what we're going to do and we want you to do X. A typical example would be Secret Service, supporting Secret Service when the president comes in. They tell us what to do and we do what they tell us. I mean, there's not a discussion. And that's generally what goes on, The incident with Roger, I had red flags, but I was telling him in jest, but I also was letting him know that, hey, you better make sure nothing happens that's not warranted.
So how long was it before you got out, Roger?
I was held 6 months, 10 days without bond. Then under the statute, they charged me guilty of a telephone threat because I told my own attorney after I uncovered the fact that he had committed perjury to the sheriff's department. I told him he was on the hook and I was coming after him on his voicemail on his cell phone, and they charged me with a federal crime because it went across the state line because Sprint quarter for telephone was in Michigan and I was in Ohio, so they charged me with interstate communicating of a threat, being on the hook. And the statute says that there must, to be a threat, there must be 3 thresholds: kill, kidnap, bodily harm, and the most important is extortion for money. None of those were ever committed, but nevertheless they railroaded me and I went to prison for an additional 10 months, which The statute calls for a total of 10 months totally. And I did 16 months, 10 days total in one of the worst prisons I have been told in the United States, which was Petersburg, Virginia. I had no contact with any of my family at all. And one of the sad things, and I want to get this out, once I was found that they were sentencing, my son had a Arnold Stashik or whatever disease. What it is, his skull grows down in the back and cuts off the spinal fluids, and it can cause death from building pressure up in the brain. He was headed for surgery, and he asked the judge if he could, in writing, if his daddy could be there when he had the surgery, which would have been in like 6-7 days. He would give all his Christmas presents to other children if he could do that, and the judge denied it.
Is this the same son you were holding when you came out of the house that morning?
Yes. Yeah. He went through hell.
Are you still married to his mother?
No.
So your marriage was one of the casualties of fighting these battles.
Yeah. I'm still supportive of her, but I try to take care of if I can help out in any way. And same with my son. He's a great kid.
Well, there you had kind of unusual interview, spontaneous here in Indiana. We're not in Ohio, where Roger springs from, and Brad Bell was a police officer in the sheriff's department. It's food for thought. And you look at the documents Roger's amassed here, and you have to think that the man has done everything as appropriately and as carefully, legally, lawfully as he could. And for that, they gave him 6 months plus another 10 months for something he said to his own attorney, which should have been covered under attorney-client privilege. I'm baffled, Roger, why they didn't, why the attorney-client privilege wasn't raised.
Well, there's some other things I had worked on, I guess you'd say, in the community. I worked for a law firm prior, when the first time I was arrested for a gun violation. I worked for a law firm in Detroit, Wayne and O'Connell, and I was a messenger. I exposed to the local prosecutor in Hancock County that paperwork that I was filing for these attorneys was bogus. And the Courier did the story, which you've got, tells about I was the investigator on that, and I exposed it freely. I was under no pressure, no threat, nothing to myself, but I didn't think it was right for two attorneys to commit fraud and forgery to the court and be allowed to get away with it. I was also present when these two attorneys organized a bribe over the phone. I was on the extension and listened to them make the deal with the prosecutor. At that time was Joe Niemeyer, and the judge was Richard Reinbold. Richard Reinbold passed away this last year, but Joe Niemeyer now, who was then a prosecutor, is now a judge. And he knows that I was there. He knows that that went on. And so there's been an ongoing effort to silence in any way, shape, or form that they could. The next thing was that later on, I had been tipped off that there were members of the Findlay Police Department that were using a German Shepherd dog having sex with a little girl, and we dug into that and found out it to be true, and they were developing the pictures at Taylor Photo in Findlay. When that information came out, I already had somebody working undercover inside of Taylor Photo, which Randy Taylor did not recognize until it was too late. We had all the information. As a result of the pressure brought down, and I would give our information to the chief, which was at that time Dan Roudson, and he just about lost it. He was very upset. As a result of that, Mark Maston was indicted. He was an officer and indicted for, in fact, involved with pornography.
An officer of what?
Findlay, Ohio.
What kind of an officer?
Police officer.
Oh, he's a sheriff deputy or
No.
city police?
City police. This was all city police.
And that's why the chief was really upset. This is one of his
Well,
own.
his brother was involved.
Oh, and his own brother was involved?
Yeah. I had pictures of his brother coming out of Taylor Photo at like 8 at 15 to 8 in the morning, he'd show up at like 3, 4 o'clock, and they'd develop the pictures, and then he'd come out. And we had a source that was giving us that information. So I had inside sources.
So that made you best friend of the chief of police.
Oh, yeah. Over my lifetime, I've had two incidences with off-duty police officers, which both times they ended up in the hospital. No charges were ever filed. It was all hush-hush, kept under the rug. The last one, he almost died. Punctured his lung with one of his own ribs and busted him up pretty good. The first one broke his jaw.
What year was that?
Last one would have been, say, 98, maybe 98, 99, in that area.
He doesn't come to bother you anymore?
No, I thought maybe I'd invite him to sit down and a cup of coffee, but
He would decline?
his commander called me, wanted to know how many guys I used on him, and I said, and I didn't. He says, well, you're 14 years older than him, you're an old man, and he's our self-defense instructor. And I thought about it a little bit, and I says, well, it might be wise to get him some new training or get a different self-defense officer. So I was not pleased about the whole thing. Tim Graydon was the sheriff deputy that did the investigation on that. Tim's an all right, straight up shooter as far as I'm concerned. I got no problem with Tim, but he was upset. He said that this guy's hurt real bad. I didn't start it. I just finished it.
That's usually the best way, to be the guy that finishes it, not the guy that starts it. Well, Roger Tanner from Ohio, thank you very much for this interview, and thank you, Brad Bell, for showing up and putting in your perspective of what you observed. Do you ever, Mr. Bell, think of giving police officers just maybe a word to the wise, to be careful when trusting federal agents? Does it ever cross your mind to just
Well, I don't know how you can't become paranoid, as a police officer. You can't be paranoid about the people you work with and the other agencies you work with. So you have to have some degree of trust. But if it gets to the point, and this incident was basically a routine arrest, from the standpoint of he was taken into custody, nobody was hurt. So, it wasn't like some of the things happening today that are not necessarily federal, but just police officers seem to be quick on the trigger.
Yeah.
And you just have to make sure you're doing it right.
One comment I've got, I don't know what the answer is, but I'll make the comment of a true fact that one of the cases I worked with Jim Harpin, Channel 13 News, there was a period of time where many women had been executed or killed or whatever you want to say in the Stony Ridge area, which is a truck stop area, a lot of gas stations or filling stations for trucks, and they were all alleged that they were prostitutes, this and that, and through some family members, these girls were not. One girl was several months later.
Whose daughter disappeared?
Debbie Vine was the daughter. I don't remember his first name, but he was a officer of the bank.
Okay.
I was introduced to the FBI agent that worked on that by an individual by the name of Bill Murray. Said that since Jim Harpin and I had worked on this and thought there was a lot of irregularities, he wanted to meet with me. And the irregularity that I had brought out to Channel 13 News was that the head investigator for the Genoa Police Department on this case was a guy by the name of Ronald Doyle Spitzer. And what was very upsetting to me was that I was working between Monroe County and Lucas County, and this was actually in Ottawa County in Ohio. Monroe County was Michigan, just north of Toledo, Lucas County, and then Ottawa County was where Genoa was at. And for some stupid reason, the United Way director in both Monroe and Ottawa County were the same. I didn't know if it meant anything, but I just thought that there might be something there, so we'll go check out Ottawa County. Well, I found out, we did research on Ronald Doyle Spitzer, and Ronald Doyle Spitzer under NCIC and also Interpol was posted that this guy spent I think, 18 years in prison for murder before he became a captain of the Genoa Police Department. He was bilingual. In the murder that he committed on a woman, he was ruthless, really ruthless. And for whatever reason, I call an individual doesn't change their spots. This is a malfactor, so let's look into him. Well, we spent many hours at the council meeting in Genoa, Jim Harpin and I. In fact, we hung an effigy over their balcony of Spitzer and had his name on it, so forth, just to irritate him. But we found out that the federal agent that worked with it was a guy by the name of Bill Raccia. Well, Murray got me in touch with Raccia, and we met at Murray at his house or his apartment on a Sunday morning. And Raccia was prim and proper, as all FBI agents are, polishing his gold ring and so forth. I shouldn't make light of that, but it kind of tickles me. And he was free with the information. He solved this crime. And I asked him, I says, well, Bill, I says, in all due respect, that was George Steinberg's case, wasn't it? And he hesitated for a little bit, and he says, well, yeah, Steinberg out of Sandusky. I said, yeah, wasn't that his case? Yeah, but I did all the work. I says, you did all the work. I says, you got a conviction on a mentally retarded kid that couldn't even defend himself if he wanted to. I said, I don't think that that's quite the whole story. But anyways, you got a conviction. I said, you know, in your report, you say that her body was found in the middle of the woods. I said, do you ever put in there that the grass in the late summer was only about 6 inches high? It was fresh and green? No. I said, how in the heck, who told you that she was there? He said, well, Spitzer. I said, how did he find out? I says, when you went out there was nothing left. I said, her body was gone, it was burnt. He says, oh no, she decomposed. He said, I never put anything in my records that she was burnt. I says, well, you got me there. But I said, you did put in your report there were 2 5-gallon gas cans within 20 yards of her body that were empty, did you not? He says, where's this gone? I says, where it's gone is she was torched. I said, you either got to be the luckiest or the stupidest FBI agent I've ever seen in my life. He says, why is that? I said, Spitzer spent time in state prison for murder. I said, he spent almost 20 years. He says, was that state case or federal case? I said, it was state. He says, well, I wouldn't have had any information on it. I says, bullshit. I said, it's on NCI and it's on Interpol. He says, well, you can't get those. The next day I produced the documentation, I had it. Well, Raccia lied to get the conviction. Spitzer, we dogged Spitzer all the way down to Texas, into the killing fields. I swear he was involved with the killing fields down at Texas, south of Houston, in League City. But anyways, he was bilingual, and he's probably incapacitated because of age and so forth. But this was a organizer. He was a killer. And so no more killings going on in Stony Ridge, and no more in League City. But it's just some of the stuff that I've pushed on. Plus there's more.
Did you ever, Roger, did you ever determine how Spitzer went from being an ex-con after doing 18 plus years in prison, come out and get a chief of police job? How does that happen?
Good question. He went to school at Owens Tech, and they couldn't deny him training to be a peace officer, so he went through all the training, but they did not issue him a diploma due to the fact he was a convicted felon. But he did go through the training. And we in fact, Jim, I don't know if he still got it or not, he interviewed the chief and Chief Truman at Genoa and asked Chief Truman, says, hey, this guy's a convicted felon. We have the paperwork right here. He's a convicted murderer. And on camera, Truman says, yes, but he's self-rehabilitated himself.
Wow.
On camera.
On camera, he said that. And the city council hired him
Yes.
knowing he had murdered somebody.
Yeah.
Did you ever ask the city council what were they thinking?
We took up camping in the city council. We were a pain in there. You know what? We asked them all sorts of, how many fingers do you see, Councilman? Stuff like that. I mean, it was stupidity beyond anything you could ever imagine. The only thing I can say is that her father, Debbie Vine's father, had a gambling habit, and we feel that this was a message that someone had sent that he should pay his gambling debt. So it's back to the old mob type rule. But these people are no morality at all. None. That's the problem. And they scare, that, you know, if you got a family and so you're not going to want to fight some of these folks.
I get it. Well, Roger, do I have your permission to publish and republish this interview?
Sure. You want to send flowers to my funeral? No, we've pretty much documented. There's 3 times now we can prove. The lightest one would have been the 4th one. I was in a horrific accident, broke my back. Didn't stop me. Within 70 hours from the accident, I got up and walked out of the hospital with a T8 fracture, total fracture. Doctor said it's impossible. Can't do that. I did it. No pain medication. None. Refused it. I'm just, like my daughter says, I'm just plain tough. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but this is what happened.
Does he appear to be plain tough to you, Mr. Bell?
He's seen some of the results.
You see, we go back so far that the first time I met him, I was serving a judgment out of municipal court to take a couple autos, and I got sent down to meet the bailiff in front of his shop, and there's Roger with his holster and 6-gun on his hip.
41 Magnum.
And I never said a word about it. Just went on about my business, and called Wreckers, and Roger just stood there, and
Yes.
we did business, and that's the way it always has been. So
Yes.
I don't perceive him like a normal, somebody that meets him. All these stories that he's told, I wasn't aware of virtually 99% of them until the last couple years, So I didn't know Roger's undercover history at the time I was an officer.
Okay. Do I have your permission to publish your
Sure.
interview?
Yeah.
And republish it? All right. Well, that's it. I'm here with retired Officer Bell and Roger Tanner, a man who really just wanted to be a private businessman and make dune buggies or something. And we've got the images of those dune buggies of him back in 1970. And it's just amazing what some people have to do to overcome the criminals in office, the criminals we put in office. We allow them to hold office because too few people are willing to do anything to change it. I hope this has given you some second thoughts. William Wagner here from the Midwest. And here we are, people, back live in the studio. And it's no longer August of 2015, it's December. Roger and I were just having an off-camera discussion, which is why you saw the light change, because that discussion went on for about an hour, if I remember rightly. So how does that make you feel, knowing a man could go to as a felon, come out, take police training, and then get hired as a chief of police? What were they thinking? They're probably thinking, well, he knows the MO of all the criminals. Let's make him chief of police. He knows where to go get them.